Yes, very good afternoon. So myself is Prakash Karthik. So and I was a faculty for your polity and as well as current affairs. So from today we will start the Ncert basics batch 2023. Okay. So in this basics we will talk about all about Indian polity, right from the NCERTs, and as well as at the same time we will also cover some of the important points from the standard books. Okay. So today when you talk about polity, let us first of all understand with a very basic thing, something called as the Constitution of India. Just a minute. Okay. Constitution of India. So the Constitution of India gurinchi, when you are talking about the Constitution of India, so first of all you should understand that in the year 1947, correct, right? The year on which so we got the independence. And in this particular year, like what has happened is India is like a baby. Okay. So now, because up till then Britishers have ruled us, and now it is a time for us to rule ourselves. But however, the biggest question mark is that how to rule ourselves. Okay. How to administer ourselves. So the main fundamental reason to bring the Constitution of India is that it is basically such a document which will give you how to administer our country. It is basically contains a set of rules, so which talks about how we should administer our country. For example, administering means how a government should be. Okay, like for example, President of India, Vice President, Prime Minister and Council of Ministers at the central level, and again at the state level, the Governor, Chief Minister, and as well as his Council of Ministers and the State Legislative Assembly, and then integrated judiciary. So the entire setup was mentioned actually in the so-called Constitution of India. So that was the reason why we call it as it is a rule book for our nation guiding how our country should be governed. So how our country has to be governed. Okay. So that means it contains all the rules in which talks about how our country have to be governed. That was the first important. And the second important is not only that it provides you how to run the administration. Okay. It not only provides you how to run the administration, but it also includes some other things, like it provided the welfare measures and as well as rights and freedoms to its citizens. So that means our Constitution of India, on one part, it has gave you how our country should be administered. And on the second part, it talked about welfare measures as well. It talked about welfare of the people. How? By giving them rights known as fundamental rights, and also the directions, the so-called directions to the government called as directive principles of state policy. Even though if you don't understand now, that doesn't matter. So we will slowly one after the another, we will explain the things. And the third important point that you have to understand is in our country, it is considered as the supreme law of the land. So generally UPSC will not give you this particular, like which of the following is considered as supreme law of the land. No, that may not be given. But however, it is your duty that you should ensure that it's not executive order, it's not legislature's law, or it's not the judgment of the Supreme Court. It is basically the Constitution which is supreme in our country. Understand, right? It is the Constitution so which is supreme. Then let us talk about, so this Constitution was way back written in the year 1900 and it was adopted in the year 1949. So, but now this was 2023. And do you believe that we are using the same Constitution now itself? Even after 75 years of independence, we are still using the same Constitution. But how? Isn't it? How? Because, so this Constitution of India is considered as a living document. Why? Because every time, so there is one institution called as Parliament of India. Depending upon the circumstances in our society, it will amend the Constitution. It will change the Constitution. So when you amend the Constitution, what is it called? Constitutional amendment. Constitutional amendments were done by the Parliament. So now the question here is, who can amend the Constitution? Very important question. So for sure they will ask you, it is your duty to know this particular fact. Okay, who can amend the Constitution? So it is basically the Parliament, not only Parliament you should say Parliament alone has the power to amend the Constitution. So why? Because, so generally while giving you the questions, they will ask you like which of the following statements are correct. In that either in Roman number 1 or 2 or 3, they will say that both Parliament and state legislature has the power to amend the constitution. They'll give like that. It's like a trap. But you need to be very clear that constitution, which is considered as the supreme law of the land, can be amended only by the parliament. Okay? And under which article and all these aspects, everything we will discuss in the foundation batch. So that was the first important thing that you need to understand. Once that was done, then the next important question is, if you know that constitution is basically a document that has the power given by the power to whom? Parliament can amend the constitution. So now there should be one more power how this constitution need to be protected. So that responsibility to protect the constitution has been given to whom? To the Supreme Court of India. Okay, that responsibility has been given to the Supreme Court of India to protect our constitution. So for example, let me tell you organs of the government. We will have executive, legislature and as well as judiciary. What was the main duty of legislature? What was the main duty of legislature? No worries. Correct. So when you talk about executive, legislature and judiciary, I will categorize it into central level and as well as state level. At central level, at legislature central level, we call it as parliament. So the Parliament of India is basically considered as the central legislature. So, and as well as the main objective of this legislature is to make the laws. Whatever the laws that are required for our country will be framed by the Parliament. And similarly, when you talk about in the legislature at the state level, it is basically the state legislative assembly plus legislative council. So that means they will make the laws in their respective state. And that law is applicable within their jurisdiction. Correct, right? Then, now executive. Executive is basically the president plus council of ministers. At the state level? Correct. Governor plus council of ministers. They are all part of state executive. Now when you talk about judiciary, this is basically an integrated judiciary, not central and state level. So but at the main level, we will be having something called as Supreme Court of India. And at the lower level, we will be having the high courts. There will be one Supreme Court and there will be one high court. Here, if you see this particular, these things, here the power to amend the constitution has been given to Parliament and the power to protect the constitution is given to Supreme Court of India. Very clear, right? Yes. Now, to understand now we know that constitution is supreme in our country. Parliament alone has the power to amend the constitution. And finally, the third one, it is the Supreme Court of India which acts as a guardian or custodian of the constitution. Now, so what you need to understand is, let me tell you an example to combine all these three things so that you can better understand like practical applicability. Let us, for example, understand that, so now the COVID gone, the work from office returned, so everybody is going to the offices now. So now let us assume that tomorrow, so there was one such female employee, okay, one such female employee who was working in some Infosys or something like that. Let us assume that. So, okay, so who can amend the constitution or who can make a law in our country at the national level? Parliament. Parliament can make a law at the national level. Let us assume that Parliament has made a law. What was that law? So the law is basically, we have the law called Motor Vehicles Act 1988. Okay, so now let us, as a Parliament today, we will bring an amendment to this particular Motor Vehicles Amendment. And what was that amendment? That amendment is that, generally we know that without basically valid driving license, you cannot drive the vehicle. Triple riding is an offense. Now, the Parliament, as a Parliament, let us bring one more law, amendment called as, let us ban women driving. Let us ban women driving. That means women are not allowed to drive. This was the amendment. We as a Parliament brought that amendment, and once that bill is passed, where it will go? It will go to the President of India. President have given the assent. Okay. Tomorrow, this female employee who was on his way to her office, to Infosys, so take her scooty and she was riding. But however, traffic constable in the middle has stopped her and said that, Madam, a challan has been levied against you. What challan? I have a valid driving license with me. Okay, I have a helmet with me and everything is with me. How can you, what offense did I have committed? The offense is that you itself, women are not allowed to drive. What is that? Yesterday Parliament has made that law. So today as an executive now we are implementing that law. So now 1,000 rupees fine has to be levied upon you. She feels discriminated because the law is saying only women are violated, not men, correct, right? So now she feels very discriminated and she thought to restore her rights back. She thought to have justice upon her. What she can do? She can approach the Supreme Court because her fundamental rights were violated. Under article number 14, right to equality, where everybody is equal, her fundamental right is violated, and now she approached Supreme Court of India. So now the Supreme Court of India says, yes, what happened? She says, yesterday Parliament has made a law which says that women are not allowed to drive. It basically is violating my fundamental right. Now as a Supreme Court, who is a guardian of the Constitution, you are the protector of the fundamental rights, you have to restore my fundamental rights. Then Supreme Court says only one thing, Acha, your fundamental right is violated. Then okay, bring that law. Whatever the law that was made by the Parliament, just bring that law. So Supreme Court will take that law into one hand and the Constitution of India onto another hand. On one hand, if you see that the law made by the Parliament, it says that women are not allowed to drive. But on the other hand, in the Constitution, everybody has to be treated equal, right to equality. It's okay. Nobody should have any privileges and there should not be any discrimination. So then immediately Supreme Court will raise its eyebrows and immediately it will strike off this particular law and uphold the Constitution. True, right? So that means with these things, so with this point, the conclusions, what we have understood, it is the Constitution which is supreme. Whatever the laws that are made by the Parliament or executive orders, if it violates the Constitution, it will not stand valid and they will be declared as null and void. Okay. And here in this case, the female employee's fundamental rights are violated. When her rights are violated, she can approach to Supreme Court under Article 32 of the Constitution and to High Courts under Article 226 of the Constitution. So forget about articles as of now. Let us stick to very basics. Okay. Clear, right? Yes. So finally, these three are the thing points. And one more important point is that here in this example, we have taken that Parliament has made a law which is discriminatory to women. But in reality, it is opposite. It is the Parliament which makes a special provisions for the empowerment of women, children, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and any other backward classes. So the main objective is to bring those marginalized communities into the mainstream of the society. Clear? So these are some of the important points that you have to understand. From here, let us go to the next important thing. Now the next important thing is something called as constitutional government. Okay, what is a constitutional government? So constitutional government is basically that government which was formed by the Constitution itself. So the Constitution has prescribed the rules, the powers, how this government has to function, what powers has to be given to this particular government and how it has to function. And everything, if it is structured by the Constitution itself, that is called constitutional government. So that was the same point we have written. It is basically a government that is structured by the written Constitution. Okay. And the second important thing is that the powers of the government are limited by the Constitution. Government will not enjoy any unlimited powers. Government's powers are limited by the Constitution. So apart from declaring what are your functions, it is basically the Constitution itself will give you the limits also. One such example is fundamental rights. So that means, as a fundamental rights, these are certain restrictions. The government cannot interfere into that of the people's fundamental rights. It cannot take away the people's fundamental rights. Yes? Yes. If that is the case, then so then the next important thing is that Constituent Assembly is something that we will be discussing. So the Constitution of India was basically written by whom? It was written by a Constituent Assembly, which was actually commissioned by the Cabinet Mission Plan of 1946. I'll give you the notes later, okay, so that you can concentrately focus on the class itself. Yes. So the Constituent Assembly, it was actually constituted in the year 1946 to 49. The main objective of this Constituent Assembly is to draft the Constitution. So whatever for our country, so the Constitution is required. Now in order to draft this particular Constitution, this particular Constituent Assembly was constituted. So the same thing we have written. It is basically a group of representatives who are elected to draft the Constitution of India. To keep it very simple, we have not included lot many points. So in the foundation batch, like we will be discussing in depth about this Constituent Assembly, which is one of the most important topics from the UPSC perspective. Okay, so we just made it a very generalized definitions here itself. So and you should also understand that the Constituent Assembly is also considered as the Provisional Parliament of India. What was the main objective of the Constituent Assembly? The main objective is to draft the Constitution for our country. And when it was constituted in the 1946. And when it adopted the Constitution, we will see in the next. And it was done in 1949. Okay. So the same thing we have written here. It has held its first meeting on December 9th, 1946. You may feel that these dates may not be required, but however, what happens is with respect in questions, they will give you like arrange the orders in chronologically. First meeting of the Constituent Assembly, Cabinet Mission Plan. So this is how they will frame the questions. So according with that, you should also know that on December 9th, 1946, the first meeting, here you can see some representational image that we have kept there. So the holy so-called Constitution of India, which is a guiding document, which is considered as a living document of our country, was drafted. Okay, then. Then the next important, these are some of the important basic facts, so which there might be a huge possibility that they will ask you. So when the Constituent Assembly was constituted, so the oldest member during that time, known as Sachidananda Sinha, Dr. Sachidananda Sinha was elected as the first temporary president of the Constituent Assembly. He was the oldest member during that particular time. So, and as a result, he was appointed as the first temporary president, and later on the elections took place, and then what has happened is that on December 11th, 1946, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as the President of India. Everybody knows that fact, so nobody UPSC will never ask that, but H.C. Mukherjee was elected as the Vice President of India. So here these are some representational images. So we have to understand from the images, so that makes us to store for long-term purpose. Okay, Nandi? So H.C. Mukherjee was elected as the Vice President of the Constituent Assembly. When was the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly took place? December 9th, 1946. Perfectly fine. Yes. And then the next important point is that something called as, he is considered as the correct Sir B.N. Rao. Sir B.N. Rao was considered as appointed as the constitutional advisor to the Constituent Assembly. Okay, Andy? Yes. Once this is done, yes. This was the latest question that recently appeared in UPSC Prelims 2023. Something called as Constitution Day, also known as National Law Day or Constitution Divas, was celebrated every year on November 26th. The question that was framed by UPSC is, why we celebrate Constitution Day on November 26th? Why we celebrate? Why we celebrate is because in the year 1949, on this particular day, the Constituent Assembly has adopted the Constitution. On this particular day, on November 26th, the Constituent Assembly has adopted the Constitution. And later it came into force on January 26th, 1950. Okay. That was the reason why we celebrate that as Republic Day. And this is basically the same thing we have written here. The Constitution of India was adopted by Constituent Assembly on 26th November 1949 and it came into effect on 26th January 1950. The Constitution Day, also known as Samvidhan Divas or National Law Day, is celebrated every year on 26th November to commemorate the adoption of constitution. On this particular day, generally we will raise awareness about this constitution. So because majority of the people don't know, okay, so what are their rights, what are their duties, okay, when their rights are infringed, where they have to go. So they have the options, like for example, when their fundamental rights are violated, under Article 32 they can approach directly Supreme Court, under Article 226 to High Courts, so that their fundamental rights will be restored back. The example that we previously seen, right, with respect to Motor Vehicles Amendment Act 2018. So the Constitution Day, when it is basically, when is it celebrated? When is Constitution Day celebrated? Why it was celebrated on that particular day? Adopted by the Constituent Assembly, and that was it. When it came into force? Absolutely correct. January 26, 1950, the Constitution. Who acted as a constitutional advisor? B.N. Rao. Correct, sir. B.N. Rao acted as Constituent Assembly. Then who was the Vice President of the Constituent Assembly? H.C. Mukherjee. Correct, H.C. Mukherjee. Who was that first temporary President of the Constituent Assembly? Dr. Sachidananda Sinha. Sachidananda Sinha has elected as the temporary President of Constituent Assembly. Okay. So when this Constituent Assembly held its first meeting? Constituent Assembly first meeting, December 9th, 1946. Done. Now this was the basic classification of the Constitution, that it is categorized into written Constitution and unwritten Constitution. So now just tell me, is our country's, Indian Constitution is written or unwritten? It was written here. Example? Correct. It was a written Constitution. So it basically refers to the, okay. It basically, what is a written Constitution and unwritten Constitution? Example for the written Constitution is Indian Constitution, American Constitution. Example for unwritten Constitution is British Constitution. British Constitution, yes. British, Israel, New Zealand, their constitutions were not written, and that was an unwritten Constitution. Unwritten Constitution doesn't mean that it was written nowhere. It was written nowhere? Nowhere. But that was false. Unwritten Constitution means it was not written into a single document. In a structured single document, comprehensively it was not written. In British also, they have the Constitution, but that was scattered in multiple ways. For example, Supreme Court judgments, Parliament laws, conventions. So in these particular ways, it has been scattered into so many ways. So that means, so they also follows Constitution, they also have some established rules, but all those rules were not codified in the way we have done it. Okay? Unwritten Constitution doesn't mean that it was not written anywhere. No, that is not correct. Unwritten Constitution means it was not codified onto a single document, comprehensively into a single document. Okay? Yes, that's what we have written. It refers to the Constitution codified and compiled in a structured manner. It refers to the Constitution which is not codified in a structured manner. That means it was scattered onto the multiple things. Example is like American Constitution is one such example. Indian Constitution, which is considered as the world's lengthiest written constitution of our world, is basically the Indian Constitution itself. And the examples for UK Constitution, Israel Constitution, and the New Zealand. These are all the examples for unwritten Constitution. Now the then certain comes, what are the certain characteristics of written Constitution and what are the characteristics of unwritten Constitution is something that we need to be thorough with. It was like not moving? Yes. Yes. In written Constitution, what happens is, who is supreme? In our country, who is supreme? In our country, who is supreme? Executive order is supreme? Legislation law is supreme? Or judgment of Supreme Court is supreme? Or the fourth one, Constitution of India? Who is supreme? Who is supreme in our country? Constitution of India is supreme. Okay. All the executive orders, all the legislative laws, or the judgments of Supreme Court, they all have to be in complementary. They have to complement the Constitution of India, because in our country Constitution is supreme. So that means, and Indian Constitution is basically written Constitution, and one such characteristic is the Constitution is supreme. In the written Constitution, It is the constitution which is supreme. But unlike on the other side, for example, if you talk about unwritten constitution, British, what was supreme? The British Parliament is supreme. Okay, so this was exactly the question that was framed by UPSC. So, okay, consider the following statements about the Indian and as well as the British Parliament constitutions. In our country, the constitution is supreme, but in British, it is the Parliament which is supreme. They enjoy something called as the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. Okay, so there it is, the Parliament it is sovereign, and in our country it is constitution which is supreme or sovereign. So that's what we have written here, the constitution is supreme, and here unwritten, the Parliament is supreme in a country where there is no written constitution generally, isn't it right? When there is no written constitution, how can a constitution be supreme? So that was the reason, like here in this Parliament has more role. And the next important, what about judiciary? In a written constitution, do judiciary has more powers or very limited powers? It has more powers because it is the duty of judiciary to protect this constitution. But unlike on the other side in British Parliament, who is supreme? Again, the judiciary has very limited powers because the Parliament has more sovereign power. Correct. So, when you summarize, written constitution, it is written in a structured and a codified manner. Unwritten constitution, it was not written in structured manner, but however, it was scattered in multiple laws. For example, parliament laws or the executive these things or conventions, etc., etc. Example for written constitution, Indian constitution, American constitution. Example for, correct, New Zealand constitution and as well as the British constitution and then Israel's constitution. In a written constitution, who is supreme? Yeah, in written constitution, constitution is supreme. In unwritten constitution, Parliament is supreme. And finally, in written constitution, do judiciary has more powers or very less powers? More powers, because it is a duty of the judiciary to protect the constitution. And finally, in the unwritten, very limited powers, because there the Parliament enjoys more powers. Perfectly fine. Now, okay, let us, based upon this discussion up till now, there are few questions like from 2023, 2022, these are the questions that have been asked by the government. So, in constitutional government, do the government enjoys absolute and unlimited powers? Do it? Does it? Does it? No. Because its powers are limited by the constitution. It has to act accordingly the rules and as well as regulations that are framed by the constitution. Okay. This is the question. The question says that, this was asked in 2023 or 2022 maybe, they just simply asked you, constitutional government means, try to identify the answer, a representative government of a nation with a federal structure, a government whose head enjoys nominal powers, a government whose head enjoys real powers, a government limited by the terms of the constitution. What was the answer? What is a constitutional government? Correct, absolutely correct. So, a constitutional government is basically a government that was limited by the terms of the constitution, and that was the answer to this particular question. So, the explanation, the same thing we have given here. So, therefore, the answer is D, and a constitutional government is defined as a government that operates under the set forth by the nation's constitution. Clear, very clear. And we can read, these are the blah blah points that we already know. Like this means that government's powers and functions are defined, regulated and constrained by the constitution, which is considered as the supreme law of the land. And finally, the constitution provides us the framework within which the government must operate. Like for example, the President of India and as well as Prime Minister, Vice President, Council of Ministers, who has to depend on whom? Okay, the relations, ensuring that its actions and policies conform to the principles, rights and duties laid on its constitutional document. Okay. Why we celebrate Constitution Day on November 26th? Because why we celebrate Constitution Divas on November 26th? Correct. The Constitution was adopted by the Constituent Assembly on that particular day to commemorate that. So, we celebrated that particular thing. Correct. Let's see the next question. This was again the same question, but in a different format, asked way back in 2 to 3 years back. A constitutional government by definition is I think you can easily answer this question. A government by legislature, popular government, multi-party government, limited government. What was the answer? Limited government. Absolutely correct. Because why it was limited? Its powers were limited. By whom? By the constitution. Correct. Its powers were limited by the constitution. So that was the reason why we call it as the same thing we have written. A constitutional government is fundamentally a limited government. The essence of a constitutional government lies in its adherence to a constitution which sets out the framework and limits of a governmental power. Okay, fine. Yes, can you answer this question? What is the chief purpose of the constitution? At the first place, why the constitution is required? What is the purpose of the constitution? It says that it determines the objective for making necessary laws. Okay. It enables the creation of political offices and a government. Okay. It defines and limits the powers of the government. Okay. And finally, it secures the social justice, social equality and social security. What may be the answer here? Okay. Social justice, social equality and social equality. Maybe all the other options, all the 4 options may be correct. But the question here is the best reflects. Because the constitution creates the objective of making necessary laws. Whenever a particular laws are made, in the preamble we have the objectives. Okay. And it enables the creation of political offices and a government also. That is also true. Correct. It defines and limits the powers of the government. In the previously 2 things we have seen it, right? So generally 4 options seems very similar and the 4 options seems correct as well. Here it is correct. But however they are asking you best, what was the best reflects this particular power. So therefore that was the answer. Okay, done. The primary purpose of a country's constitution is to define and as well as limit the powers of the government. It serves as a supreme law of the land, establishing the framework for the principles of the governance. Now can you answer this question? Which of the following is considered 2020, maybe in 15th question this was. In 2015 this was question, who is considered as the custodian of the constitution? Custodian or guardian or the protector of the constitution. Options are like President of India, Prime Minister, Lok Sabha Secretariat, Supreme Court of India. Obviously, it is the Supreme Court of India which acts as the protector or the custodian of the constitution. So therefore here the answer is D. You can see the Supreme Court of India is considered as the custodian of the constitution. As the apex judicial authority, the Supreme Court has the primary responsibility in upholding the constitution, thereby ensuring its supremacy and safeguarding the rights and as well as the duties that are enabled as enshrined in it. 2 objectives. Number 1, ensure its supremacy. Constitution's supremacy has to be ensured by the Supreme Court, and at the same time it also should safeguard the rights and liberties. Okay, rights and as well as liberties of the citizens. Like for example, fundamental rights we have talked about. It is the duty of the Supreme Court itself to protect it. Done. And this was the question. On the previous slide we have seen, right? Consider the following statements about Constitution Day, and this was the most recent and latest question that was asked in 2023. So 4-5 months back asked question. Consider the following statements with respect to the Constitution Day. The first statement.
The Constitution is celebrated on 26th November every day is promoted constitutional values among the citizens.
Okay.
On 26th November 1949, the Constitutional Assembly of India set up the drafting committee under the chairmanship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to prepare the draft Constitution of India.
Which statements are correct? First one is correct. Okay. Why first one is correct? Because it was celebrated every year on 26th November to promote the constitutional values among its citizens. That is correct. What about second statement? We know something. Before and seeing the options, we know that on November 26th, 1949, Constitution was adopted by Constituent Assembly. But see how they have given it. They are saying that on November 26th, the Constituent Assembly set up a drafting committee to draft a Constitution of India. Is that true? No. So that means only correct and statement 2 is incorrect. Correct. So the same thing we have written here. Statement 1 is correct because as a Constitution Day, also known as National Law Day, is celebrated every year on 26th November. And number 2, this day commemorates the adoption of Constitution of India. On 26th November 1949, the Constituent Assembly formally adopted the Constitution, which later came into effect on January 1950. Perfect. The celebration of Constitution Day aims to the contributions of the framers of the Indian Constitution. So the statement 2 is not correct. Why? Because on this date it was adopted. Yes, correct. It's making sense, right? Yes, clear, right? Yes. Now, so this was the next important topic that we will be discussing, called as the parts of the Constitution. So the parts of the Constitution, we already know that the Constitution is supreme and it is the lengthiest written Constitution in the world. So since it was because of its bulkiness, so the constitutional framers thought to simplify it so that people can easily understand it. Okay, without understand we cannot implement it, right? So in order to understand it clearly, it has been divided. Now here two things with respect to parts of the Constitution. The day on which the Constitution was adopted, like for example by the country, it came into effect on 1950, and what was the present status? Okay, so in the year 1950, we have something called as 22 parts and as well as 8 schedules and 395 articles of the Constitution. Okay, but however, we already know that the Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution under Article 368 of the Constitution. Why? In order to adjust to the changing circumstances of our society. So it thought to amend it, and accordingly after so many amendments, now the present status is like we have 25 parts, 12 schedules and 448 articles in the Indian Constitution. Okay, no? So there may be chances that what was the status of the Constitution of India in the year 1950? It is like they will give you the same options: 12 parts, 8 schedules, 448 articles, 22 parts, 8 schedules, 448 articles. In multiple combinations they will ask. In the year 1950, we have 22 parts, we have 8 schedules, and then we have 395 articles. But in the as of 2023, 25 parts, 12 schedules, 448 articles. So you already know that in order to understand, in order to make it simple for our understanding, the Constitution has been broken down into multiple parts. Okay, then if that is the case, so let us now on a very basic level, these parts are very important, and that this is may not be UPSC may not ask you, so fundamental rights are mentioned in which part, directive principles are mentioned in which part, that may not, but the knowing of these parts will help you to maybe to write the polity related mains answers or to eliminate some of the options. Okay, accordingly. So here we will not discuss in a very elaborative way. Let's confine ourselves to basics itself, and if that is the first important part is part 1 of the Constitution. Whenever these parts were just arranged not just like that, they were arranged with a logic. Okay. For example, when you talk about a country, the first and foremost thing you should have is land. There should be a land, then only the other things will come. So in our Constitution also, we thought to mention about the land. That means the union and its territories, to what extent our country is all about. Okay, and as well as the part 1 mentions about how they're establishing new states, altering the boundaries of the states, renaming or the boundaries of the states. Okay, it's basically I meant to say renaming the states. For example, Kerala, they are now passed a resolution to change their state to something called Keralam. Okay, they passed a resolution. So now that comes under this part. So that means, once that resolution is passed by the state legislative assembly, that has to go to the parliament, and parliament has to make the changes. And while it is making changes, it uses the law which is mentioned under part 1. So that means in part 1, it has clearly been mentioned how to rename the state's name, how to change the boundaries of a state. For example, Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act 2019. Once upon a time it was a state, but now it was a union territory. 2 union territories, Jammu and Kashmir with legislative assembly, Ladakh without legislative assembly. No worries, even if you don't know, okay, we will discuss, so when it comes. Okay, so that means Now you have understood that by using part 1 of the constitution, what we can do? We can change the name of the state, we can alter the boundaries of the state, all those things. So they may ask you in an indirect way, they will say that which of the following parts of the constitution deals with changing the name of the state or altering the boundaries of a state or a union territory or merging two states. For example, the Telangana, the AP Bifurcation Act 2014 has been passed and Telangana has been carved out. Again by using which part? Part 1. Okay. The next, once the land is there, when you are ready with the land, now on the land there should be people. And people should have something called citizenship. People, first one is land, that's why we mentioned union and territory as part 1, and number 2 is citizenship. So that was the reason part 2 deals with the citizenship. So in this particular part, so that there are different ways how to acquire the citizenship, and there are different ways one can lose their citizenship. All those things we will discuss when we are discussing the citizenship. Yes. And then the most important one called as fundamental rights. Fundamental rights are basically the basic rights guaranteed by the constitution to whom? People. To the people. Now a question. Is it applicable only to Indians or foreigners as well? Is these fundamental rights applicable only to the Indian citizens or to the foreigners as well? Only Indian citizens. You mean to say that only Indian citizens only has the power to, enjoys the fundamental rights? No. Even foreigners as well have the fundamental rights. Okay. For example, article number 14, right to equality, right to life under article 21. There are 5 articles which are exclusively only to Indian citizens. But the rest other all articles are all applicable to both Indians and the foreigners as well. When we are discussing the fundamental rights as a concept, so completely we will discuss and the in-depth analysis that we will carry out about all those things. As of now, our current knowledge is that these are the basic rights given to the people by the constitution. Are they guaranteed? Yes, they are guaranteed. When they are violated, what happens? When they are violated, can you restore your fundamental rights back? Yes. By approaching? Under which article? Okay, no worries. As of now, it was 32. Okay, these articles need to be just like mobile numbers of our friends. Okay, that we need to be very thorough with these numbers. Under article 32, we approach Supreme Court. Under which article we approach High Court? 226. Okay, 32 is for Supreme Court, 226 is for High Court. Done. So part 3 is basically fundamental rights. These are the basic rights guaranteed by the constitution to that of the people. And then comes something called part 4, directive principles of state policy. What are all these? The so-called directive principles of state policy. In a simple nutshell, let me tell you, these are actually directions. For example, we have some directions, right? Please switch off your mobiles while you are in class. Please leave your footwear outside. These are the directions issued by the management to the students. They have to follow while they are entering into the class. Likewise, these are the directions issued by the constitution to the government of the day. So for example, in Telangana, so now Revant Reddy's government, Congress government is there. So likewise, at the central level, whatever the government forms, they will rule for 5 years. While they are ruling, they have to implement these directions. Okay, they have to implement these directions. So now can I say that these are the directions issued by the constitution to the government of the day? Yes, correct. Yes. The same thing we have written. There are many points associated with the directive principles, so that we will slowly move on. So these are the directions issued by the constitution to the government of the day. Government of the day means whichever the government which is ruling, that's considered as the government of the day. So now, right now the Congress government, that is considered as government of the day. Okay. So let's revise for a while. What was part 1 of the constitution? Union and its territories. So it deals with article number 1 to 4 of the constitution. As of now, forget about articles. There's something that you need to be very clear is that in this particular part, it provides about the laws, how the parliament should rename the name of the state, how it should alter the boundaries of a state, By using this, if it want to merge two states, it can merge. By using this particular part, if you want to break the two states, it can do that. I think there are all live examples we have been seeing. Jammu and Kashmir is one such example. Andhra Pradesh, Telangana is one such example. All these are examples. Then once land is there, number two, people are there, citizenship. There are different ways to acquire the citizenship. There are different ways to lose the citizenship. And all those nitty-gritties and specifications we will discuss when we are discussing part 2. Then the most favorite one, generally we love duty, when we love rights, not duties, isn't it? But that should not happen. The way how we are seeing rights, in the similar way we should see our duties as well. Okay? So now part 3, fundamental rights. These are the basic rights guaranteed by the constitution to the government, right? To the people, yes. Fundamental rights are basically the rights, basic rights which are given by the constitution to the people of the country. It includes only Indian citizens? No, it includes foreigners as well. But however, there are certain exceptions for certain articles, fundamental rights which are only applicable to Indian citizens. For example, public employment. Now you are writing the Union Public Service Commission. Okay, foreigners cannot write it. They cannot be discriminated. They cannot seek any government employment. It is our prerogative. It is our fundamental right. And part 4, directive principles of state policy. These are, what are these? Directions issued by whom? To whom? To the government. That the government has to follow when it is ruling the particular country. Okay, what the principles that it contain and all those aspects we will see when it comes to it. Then a new part has been added. Generally we don't love this particular part because we want only power, not responsibilities, right? So that should not happen. Okay, along with the power comes more responsibility. Likewise, when you want rights, you should also take duties. Part 4A. A indicates that it was not originally there. A indicates that originally there means 1950. When I say originally, just think about 1950, the moment when the constitution came into force. So that was not there, but later on it was added something called as fundamental duties. So these are the duties that every citizen has to follow. These are the duties every citizen has to follow. For example, so you should renounce the practices which are derogatory to the dignity of the women. So, okay, you should not do any such practices which compromises the dignity of the women. Okay, that is one of the fundamental duties. We have to develop scientific temper. We have to show compassion towards living creatures like animals. These are all our fundamental duties. How many fundamental duties are there? 11 fundamental duties are there. Okay, so we will discuss all those 11 fundamental duties when we discuss the concept of fundamental duties. So that the same thing that I have written, these were later added to the constitution to make its citizens responsible citizens. Clear? And then, so the first one is land. We came up with union and its territory. Second one is citizenship. Third one, we gave some rights to the people, fundamental rights. Now there should be some government which should govern it. That was the reason why we have written government. So it starts from the highest hierarchy level, union government. The union government includes the president, the prime minister and his council of ministers, the parliament. All these are all part of the union government. Okay. Now again in foundation batch when we are talking about the union government, we will discuss these things in a much more elaborative way. Because we have to understand that relationship between president and the prime minister and his council of ministers. What is the role of the parliament here? How come Supreme Court comes into picture? Comptroller and Auditor General, Attorney General. We will discuss all those aspects. Just one step down. State governments. Okay. At the state governments, we have something called governor, chief minister, and his council of ministers, legislature. Whenever you are not aware of the state-based question, when something has been given at the state-based question, for example, some state legislative assembly-based question, when you are thorough with the parliament, the same logic applies here as well. So, once you are very thorough with the union government, state government will be just a cakewalk for you. Yes. And then part 7. Part 7 has been repealed because it contains something called as part B states. Now, how many states are there as of now? 29. You added one state?
Telangana is AP.
Okay. But Jammu and Kashmir has been brought down. Okay. There are 28 states. There are only 28 states. And how many union territories? Even this can be a question. So if UPSC thought that, let us be very simple in polity, let us ask very basic question to them. Okay, let us give some 2 marks to them. If they ask you what is the status of the states and as well as union territories in our country as of 2023, and if you say it was 29 states, out. Okay, even 1 mark can cost you 1 year. So please be very, very clear while you are doing this. So therefore, we have 28 states, 8 union territories. This is the status in 2023. But however, if you see 1950, the status is different. Then we have 14 states and 6 UTs. 14 states, 6 union territories. So you need to be very clear, are they asking the status in 1950 or are they asking the status at present? So because they'll give you both the options. Yes. So earlier, even this is not there. This states and UTs concept is also not there. Earlier what used to be there, part A states, part B, part C, part D states. This is how the classification used to be. But after 1956, they have been brought to 14 states and 6 UTs. And slowly, gradually, so the states has been merged, broken down on language basis, on linguistic basis, and even AP is the first such state to be divided or to be created on language basis. Okay. So therefore, in the year 1950, we have the status called 14 states and 6 union territories. In 2023, the present status 28 states and 8 union territories. So in part 7, as I talked about you, right, like part A, part B states, this part 7 used to deal with this part B states. And since that system is completely abolished, so we thought that there is no use of this part. Let's delete this particular part, is something that has been done. Now, let us again revise. What is part 4A? Fundamental duties. So these are the duties to make the citizens responsible citizens. Okay. So along with rights, we should also want duties as well. We should implement duties as well. We deserve the rights when we implement our duties. What is part 5? Union government. It includes the president, the prime minister and his council of ministers, so parliament, etc., etc. We will discuss. Next, state government, part 6.
Governor, Chief Minister, Council of Ministers,
State legislature. And finally, part 7. Repealed. It was repealed. You should say repealed. What is part 4?
Part 4.
Oh my God, previous slide.
Part 4.
DPSPs. Directive Principles of State Policies. What are these? Directions issued by the Constitution to the government. Government of the day. What is part 3?
Fundamental rights.
What are they? They are the basic rights guaranteed by the Constitution to the people. What is part 1?
Part 1 is states and territories.
Yeah, union and its territory, you can say. Part 2? Citizenship. So now you are very thorough with part 1 to part 7 of the Constitution. Yes, perfect. Then the next important thing is, shall we continue or should we stop? We can continue? Yes. So these are actually, now we have states. There are some territories which requires directly to be administered by the center. Those are called union territories. So what are all, how many union territories at present? We just now discussed 8 union territories. What was the status in the year 1950? 6 union territories, absolutely correct. So these are actually directly administered by the center, and that's the reason we call it as centrally administered territories, correct. These are also considered as the centrally administered territories, and it is mentioned in part 8 of the Constitution, and we have 8 union territories, and it is the President of India who will administer these territories by appointing his agent there. That agent can be called as Lieutenant Governor, that agent can be called as an administrator, etc., etc. Okay? We will discuss when we are discussing all those 8 union territories, all those things. Then something called as local self-government has been brought up. So we've seen central level, we have seen state level, now it is a time to see the local level. So to give this constitutional status, so 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act 1992 has been brought up, and the constitutional status has been given to panchayats, and a new part has been added called as panchayats, the local self-government in the rural areas. And similarly, part 9A, municipalities for the in the urban areas. Municipalities will be dealing. And a new part, something interesting called as cooperative societies. So that means people can come together and form a cooperative society. Even as of now, that was a fundamental right to these particular people. In order, and it is a duty upon the state to promote the to promote the cooperative societies. When I say it is a duty upon the state, where it might have been written? When I say it is the duty of the state, or when I say it is the direction issued to the state to promote the cooperative societies, in which part it was written? Part 5 or 4, forget about number, where it was written at least. In which part? It was a direction given by the constitution. Correct. And that part is called DPSPs. That's it. Okay. So to promote the cooperative societies is a duty of the state. When I say duty of the state, that was actually written something in the directive principles, because that was a direction that was issued by the constitution to the government of the day. And accordingly it has to implement it. So therefore, part 8, union and union territories, part 9, panchayats, 9A, municipalities, 9B, cooperative societies. Okay, fine. What is part 3? Fundamental rights. Part 6? Part 6. Part 4 is directive principles. Part 5 is union government. Part 6 is, when part 5 is union government, part 6 is state government. That's it. Okay. Then, apart from states and union territories, there are certain areas which requires a special administration because they are some backward in nature. Okay. So now therefore, it is again the duty of the government that a special type of administration has to be ensured. That was the reason we designate them as tribal areas. We designate them as schedule and as well as tribal areas, and that was mentioned in the part 10 of the constitution. The same thing we have written. These are the special areas, different way of administration. Whatever you are doing in states, whatever you are doing in union territories, no. Just a different set of administration is required in this particular areas called as schedule and tribal areas, and that is mentioned in part 10 of the constitution. Clear, right? From the very beginning, Constitution of India, what was the purpose? It is basically a rule book that was basically given to what? For what purpose? How to administer our country, how to run our country. So the same thing has been given in the Constitution of India. Next, apart from giving the administration related things, it has also provided us about the welfare measures as well, in the form of rights to the people and as well as duties to the people, and many welfare measures in the form of directive principles as well to the people. Is the Constitution supreme in our country? Yes, the Constitution is supreme in our country. It is the Constitution which is supreme in our country. Done very clear. Then the next important points that we discussed. Who acts as the custodian of the Constitution? Supreme Court of India acts as a guardian or custodian or protector of the Constitution. And even it is a protector of fundamental rights as well. I will approach Supreme Court when my fundamental rights are violated under which article? 32, correct. And I approach High Court under which article? 226, absolutely correct. Okay. Who will amend the Constitution? Who will amend the Constitution? Constitution can be amended by whom? Parliament alone. Okay. There can be a trap that they may include state legislature as well. Only Parliament alone has the power to amend the Constitution. Perfect. Then, in a written Constitution, in a such country, what is supreme? Constitution is supreme. In an unwritten Constitution, what is supreme? Generally, Parliament is supreme. Example is British Parliament. British Parliament enjoys something called as doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. These wordings are very important. Okay, na? Doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. Yes. Now let us go to the next one. Now we have seen part 5 as union government. We also seen part 6 as state government. Now the next part is the relation between the union and state government. Okay, so what are the relations between? So that means we have some administrative relations, legislative relations, financial relations. So these relations are all discussed in part number 11 of the Constitution, relation between the union and as well as the states. These provisions will cover the legislative and as well as administrative relations. When we are discussing this part, we will discuss that particular one. And these are some chota mota parts. Part 12 is like finance, contracts and as well as suits, and which have some very less significance for us, because this constitution was written not for UPSC alone purpose. This constitution is written for the administration of our country. Okay, that doesn't mean that we need to read the constitution from the top to the bottom. All the 448 articles we need to be completely thorough. No need. What are all significant? Okay, what are all the significant aspects that we need to be very thorough. And then part 13 of the constitution talks about the trade and as well as commerce, how the interstate trade has to be carried out, and as well as all the other related provisions, who can regulate all those things. And now comes our interesting part and our most favorite part, is called as services under the union. The so-called Union Public Service Commission, the exam that we are writing, that all comes under this particular part. So there may be chances that UPSC may be asking you on this particular part. So in this particular part, so the services under the union, like it mentioned about all India services, and what are the central services, yes, and what are the state services. Everything it is all, they are all mentioned under this part. And also public service commissions, that includes at the central level Union Public Service Commission, at the state level that concerned Tspsc, for example Telangana Public Service Commission, APPSC, Andhra Pradesh Public Service Commission, and there can be JPSC, Joint Public Service Commission. That means 2 or more states can come together and form something called as JPSC. So that means that JPSC will do the recruitments to that particular both the states concerned. All those aspects, all India services, central services, state services, public service commissions, everything are discussed under part 14 of the Constitution. Then the next part is generally the important courts we have, the Supreme Court or High Courts. These courts are burdened with many cases, and there may be cases which may be too technical in nature. Okay, there may be something like income tax related cases, arbitration related cases, maritime, whatever the cases. So in order to avoid that clutter on that particular Supreme Court and High Courts, a special type of courts called as tribunals. Tribunals are the specialized courts which has been constituted for that purpose, exclusive purpose. Let us discuss some examples. For example, CAT. CAT means Central Administrative Tribunal. Tribunal. For example, this is a court for public servants. For example, whenever public servants means IAS, IPS and all these people and all the central government employees, whenever any issue with their, for example, when a person has been terminated, just like that, when a person has been suspended, just like that, or some discrimination has been carried out, then they will approach CAT, not Supreme Court. Supreme Court will say that, we have a separate tribunal for you called as CAT. Please go there and just restore your remedy there. So, and there are other tribunals, for example, environment related tribunals, we call it as NGT, National Green Tribunal, okay, and then we have AFT, Armed Forces Tribunal, then we have Water Disputes Tribunal. All these tribunals, no worries, I will provide you the notes, and while we are discussing that part, each and every tribunal we will discuss in detail. So that is all about part 14A. This A again indicates it was not originally there, later on added. Can you tell me one such part which was not originally there but later on added? Not this one, the previous one. Can you tell me which one? Is it part 5? Part 4A deals with fundamental duties, correct. Part 4A deals with fundamental duties, and that was later on added, which was not originally there in the Constitution. And this was another part called as tribunals, which was not there. Then in a democracy there should be fair elections. For fair elections there should be an independent constitutional body. That's for the reason elections. Now coming couple of months, so we are going to face both the parliamentary and as well as legislative assembly elections. In that context, this part will be very, very important. So there may be chances that on election based questions we will be having. So it contained all the detailed provisions about the Election Commission of India, which is a constitutional body in our country, which is an independent body in our country, which is responsible to carry out the elections in our country. Okay. Both it includes the state election commissions and as well as central election commissions. So there are two differences that you need to be understand. When I say Election Commission of India, when I say state election commission, what are the duties of Election Commission of India and what are the duties of state election commission? I mean to say Election Commission of India conducts elections to what and state election commission conducts elections to what? Any guess?
State election commissions, CM ministers are there, or
Yeah, okay.
prime minister.
I mean to say, can I say a statement that Election Commission of India, because it is a national body, it constitutes elections at national level, and since the state election commission is basically at legislative assembly level, can I say that? Election Commission of India is basically at central level. That was the reason it conducts elections to the parliament and all these things. And state election commission is basically at state level. So that was the reason it is responsible for the state level elections. Can I say like that? But it is false. Why? Because it is the Election Commission of India which carry out the elections for at national and state level as well. Okay. But the state election commission conducts elections to local level. For example, panchayats and municipalities. It is the duty of state election commission to carry out that. Okay. Telangana Legislative Assembly elections recently carried out. Now can you tell me who has carried out it? Like Election Commission of India or State Election Commission? Election Commission of India, because that was assembly level elections. That difference you should be very clear. Because if you see from the logic, it clearly says, that Election Commission of India, okay, at national level, State Election Commission, okay, at state level, that will be our logic, but never ever, okay. These are the called traps, okay, Nandi? These are called traps laid by these things. Then, this is like part 16 of the Constitution. We know that even though everybody is equal, there are certain communities which are little word backward. There are certain communities which are marginalized. So therefore, it is the duty of the, for example, scheduled caste, scheduled types. It is the duty of the government to bring them forward. How you will bring them forward? You will give some reservation. So, okay, you will waive off the entrance fees. You will seek some reservation in the case of promotions. That is how we will make them, bring them into the mainstream of the society. That was this part is all about. Special provisions about to certain classes. That certain classes includes scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, etc. Backward classes. Okay, we are ending to the last thing. Okay, then in every particular country and at the state level, we have something called as official languages. How many official languages are there? 22. At present, the official languages that we have are 22 are the official languages. Okay, it contains the provisions for the official languages of the union, states, and judiciary. I mean, which language they have to use officially for official purposes. All those details are mentioned under this part. And this comes emergency provisions. So we were surrounded by certain enemy countries, for example, Pakistan or the China. Therefore, we need to be very cautious and we have to enhance our defense capabilities from time to time, because and the constitution framers have identified that there will definitely be a threat. If there is a threat, so how we have to handle? That is what is the objective of this particular thing. Emergency provisions. We have discussed center-state relations. When in these emergency provisions, that relations will be completely changed. All those dynamics, how the relations are changed and all those aspects, we will discuss when we are discussing this part 18 of the Constitution. And for now, let me say that we have three types of emergency. National emergency. Second one is state emergency. It is also called as constitutional emergency, or it is also called as the most popular name, President's rule. President will administer directly the state. Will he administer the state directly? No, he administers directly the union territory. But during emergency provisions, when that emergency provisions are there, the president will administer that particular state directly. That's popularly called as President's rule. It is also known as constitutional emergency. And whenever there is any war, for example from Pakistan tomorrow or from China tomorrow, whenever there is any war, any external aggression is there, in all those contexts, national emergency will be, right? In national emergency, you cannot say that your fundamental rights are there, they will be suspended. We discussed that fundamental rights are basic rights guaranteed by the Constitution of India to the people, but these rights will be suspended. Okay, these are little bit more analytical things. When we are discussing, I meant to say that we will discuss all those things with these things. As of now, you should be aware which part deals with what. That's more than enough for us. Then, so there are some other miscellaneous provisions. Chota mota provisions are all given in the miscellaneous provisions. So we will be discussing. And the most important part, what was that? Amendment to the Constitution. What procedure has to be followed? What majority is required to amend the Constitution? Who has the power to amend the Constitution? Everything detailed in this part. Part 20 of the Constitution. Yes, there are two more parts which are temporary provisions. With that includes 22 parts of our Constitution. Okay. So, part 1, Union and its territory. Part 2, citizenship. Part 3, part 4, part 4A, duties. Part 5, Union government. First Union government at the highest level. State government. Part 7, repealed, not there. Part 8, Union territories. Part 9, something lower level, still more lower level, panchayats. 9A, municipalities. 9B, cooperative societies. Okay. Revise these parts tomorrow so that you will be very thorough with me as well. Okay, and yes. So with this, now you are very clear? Yes. Right from the Constitution being supreme and law book to 22 parts of the Constitution. Yeah. Tomorrow what we will be doing is, we will discuss about schedules of the Constitution. How many schedules originally are there? Originally how many schedules are there? Schedules? Yes. Originally? Originally means by 1950. Those are parts. Since this was the first class, that confusion you will have. I think you will be given the handouts. Just once revise them, because even recalling this much is even more very good. That was actually okay. Tomorrow once you see that handouts, and as well as if you go home and just revise them, by tomorrow everything will be very clear. Okay, schedules are 8 schedules originally, and now 12 schedules. We will be discussing all those particular schedules and all. Slowly we will go on. Once we are into foundation batch, we will discuss in a much more depth way. We are just saying these are basics, these are basics, these are basics. Okay, that's the reason these are not purely NCERTs. These are NCERTs plus basics. Okay, whatever all required for the foundation batch. So we were discussing just like a warm up thing. So that by then, when I say it is basically the Parliament's power to amend the Constitution is not absolute and it is limited, you feel that Acha, is the power of the Parliament to amend the Constitution? When you say like that, that doesn't make any sense. In this basics, you should know that, okay, there is something called Constitution, and that will be amended by the Parliament. And in foundations, we'll be discussing that power is not absolute, and it is subjected to certain restrictions that were imposed by Supreme Court of India in the form of doctrine of basic structure, blah, 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 blah. And they keep on going. For that, these basics are must and should. I hope it was clear. Yes. Thank you. Let us continue the discussion tomorrow. Yes.